Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Page. I'm Eric Anderson, librarian at Hal Branch Library, and tonight I'll be speaking with four fantastic authors: Dee Armstrong, Stephanie Nelson, Brian Paone, and Karen Stone. If you have any questions for the authors, please write them in the chat, and we will get to them during the Q&A session. If you have any questions for a specific author, make sure to include their name. If you need closed captioning, you may turn it on by clicking the CC button on the bottom right of Facebook's video player. Now, let's meet our authors. Let's see here. So, Dee Armstrong writes knee-melting romance and mind-bending mystery with a twist of sass and splash of supernatural. She's the author of Visions of Emerald, Sleepwalking with Ruby, and Haunted by Amethyst, and now launches her J.D. Wolfe series with Haunted by a Broken Oath, a killer Nashville top pick. Perfect for fans of gritty female leads, twisty mysteries, and a touch of paranormal, and awarded as a killer Nashville top pick. A former Russian linguist and Taekwondo black belt sparring champion, Dee believes in tough heroines, complicated heroes, and ghosts who seriously need boundaries. And welcome, Dee.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dee Armstrong. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Eric and the library, for welcoming local authors into this space. I'm Dee Armstrong. I write romantic suspense and paranormal mysteries, stories about cold cases, resilient women, found family, and things that refuse to stay buried. I've always been drawn to stories where justice matters, and the past doesn't stay quiet. I'm fascinated by what we carry with us, grief, loyalty, secrets, and how those things shape who we become. In my books, the paranormal isn't about jump scares. It represents unanswered questions and the emotional residue of a life that still wants to be heard. My newest novel, Haunted by a Broken Oath, follows J.D. Wolfe. She's a private investigator who solves cold cases. And she doesn't know it yet, but her specialty is going to be finding missing children. She's competent, stubborn, deeply loyal, and she's haunted by a ghost who doesn't always agree with her choices. When JD's pulled into a case involving a decorated military hero who she found dead and two boys vanish, the investigation begins to unravel. Not just a conspiracy, but JD's own carefully guarded past. Now, this story is about justice, trust, and chosen family. There's suspense, danger, hope of a romance. And at its heart, it's about a woman learning how to live with what she can't change and fight for what she can. And if you'll let me, I'd like to read a small piece from Haunted by a Broken Oath. The ghost name is the woman, and Godzilla Kong is what JD has nicknamed the bad guy. This is a moment where JD finds a child who doesn't believe anyone can save him. So, boy. The woman's words rattled in my head like nails in a tin cup. My heartbeat ticked up. How long would it take Godzilla Kong to come back? The geezers would never make it in time, no matter how many red lights they ignored. I can take you home. My words came out fast. Urgent. I tugged on the door handle. Unlock the door. He hid his hands under his legs. Look, my pulse raced faster than the seconds slipping by. There wasn't time to make friends. I needed him to trust me, and the fastest path to trust was truth. You can't be here when he comes back. He'll hurt you. The truth made the boy cry. Not little kid tears, but big, fat, adult tears. Tears that understood a dark future. Tears dripped onto his jeans, creating dark circles of pain. Don't cry. We don't have time to cry. Open the door. My tone ratcheted higher with the panic climbing up the back of my neck. I glanced over my shoulder for Godzilla Kong. I can help you. No one can help me. His eyes spoke of sadness, despair, and acceptance. Another tear slipped down his cheek and soaked my heart. Please, I rattled the handle with enough force that the truck shook. Open the door. Open it now. I can't, he sniffled and rubbed snot from his nose with the back of his hand. If I run, he'll grab my sister. His words quaked my body so hard that it felt as if my heart had burst through my chest and landed in the past, in a place I kept locked away in the back of my mind, where I was surrounded by other kids like me with no choices, no power, and no hope. You're protecting her. Even though my throat swelled with sorrow, my voice was strong with knowledge. Because you love her, because she can't protect herself. How many times had I done the same? How many times had I failed because I was too weak, too small, and too powerless? How many times had I sacrificed myself for the sake of another? He didn't have to nod. I'd lived his truth. Life wasn't fair, not for the powerless. But I was J.D. Wolfe, not Diamond. Not some little scared girl with no one to protect her, wasn't I? No, a volcano of anger erupted in my soul, poured through my limbs. You should be in your room in a bed, not sitting in the cold and dark. Unlock the door. His gaze wouldn't meet mine. I'd do anything to convince him, to trust me, even tell him my truth. I've been where you are. I've had someone stronger than me take me where I didn't want to go. I've given myself to protect another, but you don't have to. You don't have to choose between yourself and someone else, not even for your sister. I'll protect you, I promise. That moment captures the heart of That moment captures the heart of haunted by a broken oath. A woman who won't look away when someone vulnerable needs protecting. The book blends mystery, suspense, and a touch of the paranormal, but it's really about resilience, found family, and what we owe each other when things go wrong. If this scene stayed with you, the rest of the story keeps asking the same question. What does it mean to protect someone, even when it costs you? Well, that was me. Thank you for listening and for making a space for stories like mine.
Thank you, Dee. Sounds fantastic.
Thank you.
Next, we've got Stephanie Nelson. And let's see here. So, Stephanie Nelson is a speechwriter, creative marketing consultant, and a romance novelist. She earned her BA in journalism and political science from the University of Iowa and went on to study professional writing and rhetoric at George Mason University. Because she's always had a thing for the power of words, Stephanie writes about love, messy families, and real women who feel like your best friend or your sister. When she's not writing, she's probably in the kitchen testing a new recipe, dreaming of her future MasterChef audition. She lives in Fredericksburg, Virginia, with her husband, their son, and 3 lovable dogs who think they run the place. Stephanie, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Eric. It's so great to be here with you all tonight and the lovely authors that are on this panel. So I'm excited. Last year, I took a step back from my full-time job as a speechwriter in DC to pursue fiction writing full-time. And since then, I've wrote and published my first novel, A Recipe Called Home, and started a full-time MFA program in creative writing and completed the draft manuscript of my second follow-up novel in the Riverbend series called The Kitchen We Keep. So while I'm not working full-time as a speechwriter any longer, I've definitely kept busy. And as you can probably guess from the titles of my books, food plays a really big role. And in Eric's introduction of me, he mentioned that I love to cook. It's a really big part of my personal life. I take a lot of inspiration from it. I am not a chef by any stretch of the imagination, and I would never call myself a chef, but it is something that I learned to do at a young age with my grandmother, who is also a really big inspiration for a lot of my stories. In my first novel, I set out to write a small town romance. I am a romance reader. I'm also an eclectic reader, but I started my reading journey years ago reading small town romances. So it was something that I really wanted to dip my toes in. After writing a lot of nonfiction as a speechwriter, I was a little intimidated to start writing fiction. So this was an easy way for me to do that and be creative. And I based it on a character who is finding her way back to her family and her passions. The main character, Jules, leaves Washington, D.C. to go back to her small Midwestern town to take care of her grandmother, Rose, who she's very close with. And while there, she reconnects with her love of cooking and family and her high school sweetheart, Miles. So while it's definitely a romance, it's a lot about love and family and ambition and messy relationships and kind of finding out who you are, even if you're a little bit older in your mid 30s as well. And I really enjoyed writing this story because I was able to draw on a lot of personal inspirations in my own life. Jules is a speechwriter in the book. While she deals with a lot of struggles that I do not have, I can relate with her. And I also pulled a lot of the inspiration from my small hometown in Illinois outside of Chicago. So it was really fun and nostalgic to go back and create this world that I could reminisce about and kind of romanticize a little bit. And that's kind of what reading and writing is all about, right? So I learned a lot in that journey. I published that book in May of last year. I started writing it in December. And then after I published it, I started working on the second book, The Kitchen We Keep, which is a little bit different from the first book. It's set in 1960s Chicago, and it follows the story of Jules's grandmother, Rose, when she is a young woman living in Chicago with her big Italian family, and they own an Italian restaurant, own and run an Italian restaurant in Little Italy. As I mentioned, I grew up outside of Chicago, but obviously I was not around in the 1960s, but my grandmother was. So I was able to do a lot of interviews with her and also interview other people who actually did own and operate Italian restaurants in Chicago at the time. So it was a labor of love and research. It took a lot longer for me to complete this manuscript than the first one, because the first one I could draw on my own inspirations. And this one, I really did have to do a lot of external research to get everything right, make sure that the references that I was using were correct for the time period. But it is also a romance. It's a little less heavy on the romance than the first one, a little bit more about female ambition and what that meant in the 60s. Rose really wants to be a chef. She wants to take over her family's restaurant one day. She's working as a chef when we meet her at first in the book, to her mother's dismay. Her mother wants her to get married and have a traditional Italian Catholic family. And so she's grappling with these two sides of her. She wants to please her mother, but she also wants to pursue her passions, even though it's a very difficult time for women to be chefs anywhere in the world, really. So she has to make a lot of hard decisions. She makes some wrong decisions. And I just feel like it's a realistic story. It's not a romanticized, the heroine wins everything and makes all the right decisions. And, she's young, she's 20 in this book. So it is really about her kind of figuring things out. But I wanted to read the first opening scene of The Kitchen We Keep as a little preview. It's not out yet. I'm hoping that it will come out in March, fingers crossed. I'm working through edits right now, but edits take an undetermined amount of time. So we will see where that goes. But this is the opening scene as of right now from The Kitchen We Keep. And it is set in summer 1960. Heat from the stoves hovered in the air like a dense fog. Sweat dripped down my spine, pooling at the edge of my apron, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The dining room still buzzed with clinking glasses and demands for more bread from hungry customers waiting for their pasta like it was mass. "Joe," I shouted, turning from the row of ovens with the last pan of bubbling lasagna. "Your tortellini are exploding. Dump them out and get another pot on fast." Startled, he whipped his head around to the large pot of boiling water in front of him, lips forming an O as cheese floated amidst the broken tortellini shells. The line cooks had entered what I liked to call the twilight zone of the evening, when you either ran on muscle memory or flamed out. But tonight, flaming out wasn't an option. I demanded focus. I didn't care if it came from muscle memory or pure brute strength. Rounding the corner to slice the hot lasagna, I gave Joe an encouraging pat on the back. As our newest member of the team, he deserved some slack after working 5 evenings in a row, plus a few lunch shifts. That's where my generosity and encouragement ended, though. I might have been the only woman in the kitchen, but I refused to mother hen them. "Go easy on him," my father whispered in my ear as he walked past, pushing open the swinging doors into the dining room to greet the last wave of customers. My father lived for Friday and Saturday nights, for the hustle, the chaos, the full dining room. It's where he came most alive and most himself. Of course, it was a family affair running this restaurant. My mother, my 2 sisters, and I spent most of our time here when we weren't at school or doing chores. We'd greet, seat, and cook for the cast of regulars who frequented this place, which my father opened over 20 years ago. It wasn't only us, though. As Cucina Bella gained popularity, my father had to hire a small staff to accommodate the steady growth that came with being one of the few authentic Sicilian restaurants on the west side of Chicago. Sure, there were many Italian places, more opened each year, but Cucina Bella was the oldest and only place to get a true Sicilian meal outside of Little Sicily. From my post in the kitchen, I heard my father greet the Delano family with a hearty "Buonvenuti," welcome. I imagined him grabbing Mr. Delano around the shoulder while pecking a quick kiss on Mrs. Delano's cheek before placing the customary breadbasket on their table, the one nearest the kitchen, which my mother reserved for them each Friday. "Someone needs to bust the 4 tops in the back," Marco yelled as he barreled up to the pass to collect the next round of plates to be served. "Not me," shouted Jesse from the sink, covered in soap from his elbows down, as he scrubbed the tomato sauce from the pile of dirty dishes that seemed to never wane. I rolled my eyes. I would keep going, but I think I've probably gone over my limit already. So just wanted to say thank you again. You can find both of my books online or at Tales and Tales, which is downtown Fredericksburg. It's a brand new, well, not super new, but it's a new independent bookstore downtown. And I highly encourage you to check it out. Thank you.
That's great, Stephanie. Thank you so much. Next, we have Brian Paone. And Brian is a Salem, Massachusetts native, displaced in Northern Virginia. He's been a published novelist since 2007. He is primarily a speculative fiction author who doesn't know how to stay in his lane. His novels feature an array of subgenres for those readers who dare to venture just outside of realism. Brian is a police detective in Maryland and has worked in law enforcement since 2002. He is the father of 4 children, a self-proclaimed roller coaster junkie, a Star Wars 501st member since 2005, a New England Patriots fanatic, and his favorite color is burnt orange. In 2019, he fulfilled his lifelong dream of becoming the proud owner of a 1981 DeLorean. Welcome, Brian.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me. So my first novel was published in 2007, October of 2007. So just recently had my 18th year anniversary of being a published author. And in May of this year, I have 2 books coming out in May, and those will be books 13 and 14 cumulatively. I don't write series. Almost all of my books are standalones. So in 18 years, I will have put out 14 books. In the beginning, it was much harder when my kids were little to, get the words in. But now that they're all much older, it seems to be, I've been doing about 2 a year. I do kind of stick with speculative fiction, born and raised in Salem, Massachusetts, and I usually get kind of a wow factor with that until I add this, that not only was I born and raised in Salem, I lived there till I was 30, but I also grew up in a funeral home in Salem, Massachusetts. So picture being a kid, elementary school, middle school, and half of my friends wanted to sleep over my house every single weekend, and half of my friends were terrified to even come in for a snack because I lived in a funeral home. So I think growing up in Salem, the Salem area, living in a funeral home kind of shaped and pointed me towards the stuff that I write. And my current three novels are what's called they're called there's a term for it. Oh my god, I just blanked because I'm talking. It's interconnected standalones. Okay, woof, interconnected standalones. So I have books that are part of a series, kind of like the Babysitter's Club or the Hardy Boys, where you can read them completely out of order, but the same two main characters show up in all of them. And they are books I've written where I have stayed inside of some of America's most haunted places to write these books. And it started when I was in Missouri. And I was in Missouri for 18 weeks. Like you said in my intro, I am a detective. I was a dispatcher for 6 years. Then I was a patrolman for 16 years. And then I taught criminal justice for 4 years. And now I've been a detective now for a little bit of time. And in order to be certified as a detective, there's an academy in Missouri that we all have to go to. So I was out there for 18 months, lived there, and you start getting bored. You start trying to find things to do on the weekends. And one of my buddies was like, hey, the Missouri State Penitentiary does overnight ghost tours, ghost hunts, right? Ghost tour is different than a hunt. And I was like, yes. I was like, please sign us up. I don't care what it takes. So you would think, like, being from Salem, being big in the paranormal world, that I would have done a ghost hunt before. And I'd never. I've been on ghost tours, which is different because it's a tour guide bringing you to places where things happen, and they go, look over there. Do you see anything in the window? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But a ghost hunt is you go to these haunted places. They teach you how to use the equipment, and then they go, hey, go have fun for 8 hours and see if you catch a ghost. So I'd never done this before. At the time, I had already told my editor what my next novel was going to be. We'd already discussed it. It was already green lighted by the publishing company. My editor was kind of excited. I was outlining a neo-noir dark fantasy novel. And it's going to be like, it's a cross between like the movie Dark City and Silence of the Lambs. And halfway through this ghost investigation in the Missouri State Penitentiary, I go, it's like, man, there's a book here. I don't know what it is. I have zero storyline, but this is so much fun. What if all the ghosts got really upset that we were in here and they had just had it, and they trap everybody who's in here right now, doing the ghost investigation. And the book takes place over the course of 1 8-hour ghost investigation. And my brain started spinning, and I told my editor. She's like, I love it. She's like, this sounds great. Beef it up a bit, come back to me. I reached out with the Missouri State Penitentiary and said, hey, is there any legal thing I have to go through to you? I'd love to use the Missouri State Penitentiary as the real place where this happens. As I went through a bunch of back and forth with them, they invited me to stay there for 8 weeks to write the book. So I did. I stayed in the Missouri State Penitentiary for 8 weeks, alone at night in the dark. Every word of that novel was written somewhere on that property. And while I was there, I kept a diary of all the paranormal and unexplainable things that happened to me. And my editor talked me into including the diary at the back of the book. This was supposed to be a one-off. This was not supposed to be a series or turn into anything more. I didn't, in my wildest dreams, think that I would ever be able to do this again. So I wrote a book, and I paced it where the book takes place over the course of 8 hours, and it's written in a way where it should take someone about 8 hours to read it. So you read as the characters are going through every motion. So it's in perfect time as the characters are experiencing things through that overnight ghost hunt. I was because of the book, I was invited as the guest of honor to a supernatural soiree in New Jersey, on the Battleship New Jersey, that was put on by all these big paranormal investigators who uh, all over the country. So we had like big celebrities there, people who you see on TV, like Discovery Channel people, and I was one of the two guest of honors because of the book. And while I was there, one of the actual guy who's in charge of the real Annabelle doll, the man who's the curator of the Annabelle doll, was there, started talking to me, and was like, "Hey, have you thought about turning this into a series?" And I was like, "Nope. Those 8 weeks were terrifying enough." And to be honest with you, like, my career is, I mean, I have an urban crime thriller that's got a touch of fantasy. I have a, cyberpunk dystopian novel. I have a crime noir detective stuff. I have a time travel novel. I was like, I do not want to make this. I'm not a series person. I'm like a one and done, and we move on. He's like, well, let me introduce you to a couple who owns Kentucky's most haunted bed and breakfast / inn. Met them. By the end of the night, maybe after a few drinks, I'm now signed on to stay inside their inn for 3 weeks to write the second book. And I knew it wasn't going to be a part 2 because of I can't bring it as a part 2, but I was going to take the two main characters from the book at Missouri State Penitentiary, and now they're investigating Kentucky's most haunted inn, which is the Ditto House. So I stayed there for 3 weeks. That was terrifying. I did the same thing where I kept my diary, but holy my God, did things happen in that house. While Missouri State Penitentiary was creepy, and I have very specific things that happened to me there. The staying at the Ditto House in Kentucky had, whoo. So to wrap this up, I know I've got 14 books and I can talk about all of them all day long. But to wrap this up, my, at the time, 7-year-old, now just recently turned 9-year-old, has been dying to read these 2 books. And I'm like, no, baby, you're just a little too old. Like, I just not yet. Like, as your dad, we're just not there. Right. But I started thinking, well, what if I wrote a book for kids where the pets from my characters in those 2 books investigate a haunted house that is being haunted purely by animals who have passed. So that's the book that's coming out in May. It's a young reader chapter book. There is not a single human in the book, and it's about a group of pets who are the pets of ghost investigators. They all get boarded at the same time because their humans are going to do a weekend investigation. They sneak out through the play area fence. So there's a hole, run across the street to this house that they think is haunted across the street, and they get trapped inside, and they're doing their own investigation with ghosts that are deceased pets. I have a goldfish that's caught in a water funnel because it was flushed down the toilet when it died, so it just goes through the hallways like this. So that's a lot of fun. I'm really excited about that. So my daughter wanting to read my adult novels about me staying in these places prompted me to write this young reader, and that's called The Scary Place. And because that's what the pets call it. Oh, it's a scary place. But that is a good wrap up. I didn't want to read anything from anything I wrote because I thought telling the story about how I stayed in these haunted places for weeks on end was, maybe better in lieu of me reading a passage because, or I would read a passage from my diary. That's one thing anybody always asks me when I talk about the books is they don't care about the plot at all. I've done probably 50 or so podcasts in the last 18 months since these books came out, and not a single person have ever asked me about the plot. It's always, well, what'd you see? What happened to you? How scary was it? And so it's been a really fun experience. And there is a place in Iowa that has contacted me who has gotten wind that I'm writing these and has offered for me to stay there. And it's a haunted, that used to be an asylum. Haven't decided yet if I'm going to go, and he's letting me stay there for 30 days if I want. He's got like a bedroom in the back that he would give me. So I'm on the fence with that because I kind of want to get back to that neo-noir dark fantasy novel that I pitched to my editor 2 years ago that got put on the back burner because I didn't expect this to happen. So that's my story. So thanks for listening.
That sounds great. I love horror, so I'm gonna have to definitely check out your books. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Next, we've got Karen Stone, and Karen has been the museum division manager for St. Mary's County, Maryland, where the events of her book took place since 2017. She did her undergraduate work at Gettysburg College and obtained her master's degree at Penn State University. She got her first museum job while still in middle school and has been working in the museum field ever since. Shipwreck on the Potomac is the first book for Stone, but she has published many articles and has been a frequent lecturer on U.S. state and local history. Stone lives in Fredericksburg, Virginia with her husband, and they have one adult son who is married and living in Alexandria, Virginia. In her spare time, Stone sings with the Chamber Choral of Fredericksburg and is at as many Fredericksburg Nationals games as she can be. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, but I feel like I'm in the wrong show. I am a nonfiction writer. I have never written a piece of fiction of any kind in my life. And I really don't, I don't ever intend to write fiction, and I didn't really intend to write this book. But it did happen. The story that this book is about did happen in the Potomac River, not far from Fredericksburg, down on the northern neck between St. Mary's County, Maryland, and the northern neck of Virginia, Colonial Beach area. And I got interested in it because an amateur historian who was a member of the museum came to me one day and said, "Hey, I know you're a fan of Abraham Lincoln. Do you know about this shipwreck?" And I knew absolutely nothing about it. So he gave me a little idea about it and said, we should do something. It happened right out here. We can see the place. We should do a ceremony in the spring. It happened in April of 1865. And I said, sure, I'm up for a ceremony. Let's do it. So I started looking into it and realized that nobody knew anything about it because it was such a little tiny thing. No one cared. 87 people died. It was a big deal to those families. But in the grand scheme of things, President Lincoln had just been shot. The war was over. They were looking for John Wilkes Booth. Within a couple of days, they captured Booth, and then the Sultana blew up in the Mississippi River, killing 1,100 people. So this little piece of history was just completely forgotten. So I started doing some research on it so we could put together this ceremony. And the more I researched, the more interesting it became. And the more I realized this really was a cool story and it needed to be told. So eventually I wrote an article and then just kept doing the research, and it became this full book. And the book is about the story. It's the story of the shipwreck, but it also talks about what's going on in Maryland beforehand, and it explains why the hunt for John Wilkes Booth was taking place and focusing on Southern Maryland. Southern Maryland was as divided as the country during the Civil War. There were Southern sympathizers and Union sympathizers. It was an occupied state, so there was a lot of fighting going on. Politics was crazy. It was not a settled time at all. So when this wreck happened, it was during the hunt for John Wilkes Booth, like I said, and everyone always says that no one was killed during the hunt for John Wilkes Booth. Well, none of the big official people that were actually scouring the countryside were killed, but the Potomac flotilla was setting up a blockade to keep John Wilkes Booth and David Harold from crossing the river. A barge named Black Diamond was part of that flotilla and was anchored off of St. Clement's Island. And a troop transport ship with 300 recently released prisoners from Andersonville came downriver, and in the dark, in a storm, slammed into the barge. The barge sank, and 87 Union soldiers went down. And I do want to read an account of it because it was this account that really got me started and led me in the right direction. This was written by a survivor in 1914. He sent it in to the editor of the National Tribune. Not all of his information is exactly correct, so I had to read a whole lot of firsthand accounts and do a lot of sleuthing to get to the real story. About 350 of us ex-prisoners of war who had been recovering at Camp Parole in Annapolis, Maryland, after being in Andersonville and other prisons, were ordered to Alexandria, Virginia, to take a boat for New Bern, North Carolina, to join our different regiments and complete our term of service. The event took place on April 23rd, 1865. So Lee had already surrendered. I do not remember what time in the evening it was that we took the steamer Massachusetts at Alexandria, but between 12 and 1 o'clock at night, as we were streaming down the Potomac in fine shape, there was a crash. The Black Diamond had crossed the bows of our steamer and received a blow just back of the wheelhouse, which cut a hole in her down to the water's edge. At the same time, the Black Diamond carried off our bow, making a hole large enough to take in 5 or 6 men abreast, down to within a foot of the water's edge. We were all sleeping on the deck and other places about our steamer. When the crash came, both captains called out at the same time, "We are sinking," and all was confusion. The captain of the Black Diamond saw that his boat was in worse shape than our steamer, and as he had only a crew of 17, he ordered the Black Diamond to swing around to the side of our steamer, and our captain ordered us all into the stern of our boat to keep the bow up. We all thought that the Black Diamond was a relief boat, and our passengers commenced to jump onto her. And the more that jumped, the quicker the Black Diamond went down. I stood on the side of our steamer and saw about 150 of my comrades jump down into the Black Diamond. About 55 or 60 were drowned that night, including 7 of my regiment. When the Black Diamond swung around, she smashed one of our lifeboats so that we had but one to pick up those in the water. Our steamer worked all night and picked up about 50. In the morning, we started for New Bern, North Carolina. We were mustered out June 24th, 1865. The wreck was tragic enough, but what makes it worse is that they didn't need to be there. John Wilkes Booth and David Harold had already crossed. They were in Virginia before the Black Diamond went to take her post at St. Clements Island a whole day before the Massachusetts came downriver. So if they had gotten the word that there was no need for the blockade, those 87 men would have survived. And they had survived the rest of the war. They had survived illness. They had survived 5 months in Andersonville. They were just going back to their regiments to be mustered out, and they didn't make it. And in the end, they only recovered 37 of the 87 bodies. So the other 50 washed out to the bay, sank to the bottom of the river. We really don't know what happened to them. And we don't know all of their names because there wasn't a list. So it's heart-wrenching, this story. But it is a true story, and one that I am glad to be finally telling since it was so lost to history. And my book is also at Tales and Tales here in Fredericksburg, so I hope you will get it there. And if you're in Maryland, we have it at all of my museum stores as well. So thank you for letting me be here tonight.
Thank you so much, Karen. That sounds really fascinating. Sounds like definitely a page turner. So now that we've got all the introductions out of the way, we'll go to some questions. So the first question, I'll start with Dee.
Okay.
And my question is, your newest title, Haunted by a Broken Oath, spans multiple genres: mystery, thriller, romance, paranormal. How do you effectively balance all these themes?
Well, I'll tell you, when I wrote the book, I didn't think I'm going to throw every single genre in there that I can think of. It just kind of happened. But I think that writers balance genres the same way we balance threads in our lives. Most of us move through mystery, tension, love, and the unknown every day. sometimes all before lunch. Work can feel like a mystery or a thriller. Relationships bring romance, heartbreak, or hope. And the paranormal for me represents the questions that we don't have answers to yet. For my main character, JD, the ghost is the unanswered parts of her life, the thing that disrupts everything else, kind of like mayhem. When JD's working through a case, she's working through relationships, through her past, all at once, just like we all do. When we're at life, we're working through every aspect of our life is still with us at the same time. And that's something that readers and writers recognize. It's a universal thing. On the page, the balance really comes from the characters. Their wants and needs pull the story forward and decide which thread takes the lead at any given moment. Sometimes more than one thread takes center stage at once, like the romance alongside the thriller, the mystery alongside the heartbreak. Romance is a funny genre because I feel every book has romance in it because it's universal. Love for a spouse, love for, the happily ever after, love for a family member. Romance is not just about the happily ever after. That may be the goal. But in a series like the one I'm writing, it's often the happy for now. Sometimes love crashes and burns, and you pick yourself up and you decide whether to trust and try again. But these are universal truths when you're writing genres that readers recognize in themselves and in their worlds. And when the characters feel real, the genres stop competing and start supporting each other. The characters decide the tone, not the genre labels. And I really think that genres are how we shelve and market books, but the threads that we weave through our characters' wants and needs and the pull and tug between the characters, those are how we fill books. And that's how I weave in the different genres.
Thank you, Dee.
Thanks.
My next question is for Stephanie. And my question is, your previous novel, A Recipe Called Home, features a character who loves to cook. How did you incorporate food into a romance novel? And what is your recommendation for a date night meal?
Those are good questions. I talked a little bit about it in my intro, but food is a central theme. Cooking is a central theme in both of my books. And I incorporated it through family and a family heritage and legacy of cooking Italian food together, especially the women of the family and connecting in the kitchen, which is something that I have personal experience with. So yeah, Jules comes back to her hometown and she ends up finding this tin of recipes that her grandmother had put together when she was younger, and decides that she's going to cook her way through them with her grandma there. And, her grandma can't really help her in the kitchen, but she can sit at the kitchen table and tell Jules everything that she's doing wrong. So it goes through a lot of the recipes that I grew up with, some new recipes that I wasn't familiar with that I was able to research and actually cook here at my house before I put them in the book and wrote about them, which was really fun for me, but mostly for my husband, who enjoyed all the cooking. And then for a date night meal, well, I am pescatarian now, so I eat a lot of pasta and I'm Italian. So it would have to be something that didn't have meat in it. I would think maybe a lasagna would be nice. It's a labor of love. It's a hearty meal. And I don't know, to me, that just seems romantic, something like that. So yeah, but thank you.
Sounds delicious. Thank you. So my next question is for Brian. And my question is, I think you touched on this a little bit, but so you add a unique twist to your books by actually staying in the locations where they took place. And my question was, what inspired that? If you want to talk about that a little more.
Yeah, it was going on, like I said, going on that first ghost investigation. I'd never been on one, and there was, God, I think there was 40 people in the investigation, 40 guests, and we got broken up into smaller groups, and because Missouri State Penitentiary is made up of four buildings that you can hunt in, so they split you up into 4 groups. So there's when they kind of do the walk around, and then when they let you go, it's so vast. It's 47 acres. I mean, you can't go through all 47 acres, but that just gives you an idea of how big it is. You can really get lost. And you can turn a corner, and I mean, you can go 2 hours and not run into anybody else. And I just remember it being like 1 a.m, 2 a.m, walking through all these cells, hearing noises that I didn't know if were people or not, and just thinking to myself, man, I know there are so many like ghost movies and novels where somebody moves into a new house and it's haunted, so they call somebody to come get the ghost out, right? We hear, like we think back to like Poltergeist, something more modern, like the Conjuring series or Insidious. But I was like, how many stories or movies do we have where we go to a place where it's like a tourist attraction and the ghosts are the residents and they don't want us there? It's always, we're the residents, or the humans are the residents, and we don't want the ghosts there. But what if they don't want us there, and they're just like, you know what? Tonight's the night. You guys need to this ain't happening. And so I think it was inspired of like, how can I turn that traditional haunting on its head a little bit, because I didn't want to, and I didn't expect, when I came up with the idea, like I said, I didn't expect to get invited to stay there for the 8 weeks. And I definitely say that staying there, every word of that novel was written, and the book is called These Walls Still Talk. I realized I didn't say that in my earlier thing, but the Missouri State Penitentiary book is called These Walls Still Talk. And then the book I wrote in the Ditto House in, Kentucky's most haunted inn, that's called Unpacking the Ditto House. And I don't know if I would have gotten the tone if I hadn't been in the buildings. Every single word of both of those novels were written in those respective locations. So it's definitely creepy when it's 3 a.m. You are the only human being in this building, and you hear a cell door slam close above you, and you're writing, and that, I think that I was told that like my anxiety in real life came out in the book, because I think I vicariously put it, because I was terrified for 8 weeks while I was in there. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really interesting take on the horror genre. So next question is for Karen. And my question is, while the sinking of the Black Diamond is overshadowed by what some might consider more historically significant events, such as the killing of Booth on April 26 and the surrender of Joseph E. Johnston's Army of Tennessee to General William T. Sherman on the same day, the sinking of the Black Diamond was undoubtedly a major tragedy. And then what kind of drew you to write about this?
I talked about that a little bit, that I have always been a Lincoln fan. I don't know why. Started in 4th grade, and especially his assassination. So knew a lot about that, I thought. Been on the trails through Maryland, the escape route trails and tours and all of that. But this was just completely new to me. So when I found out that it happened right off the site of one of my museums, it seemed like an obligation in a way to do this. And because this other person had heard about it and came to me and said, let's do a ceremony. So in writing the remarks for the ceremony, which, were 2 pages long and it was pretty superficial, I got more intrigued, and people started coming up and saying, we didn't know about this. What else do you know? What else can you tell me? So I just started researching it, and I had no intention of writing a book. I will tell you that. That was not in the plan. I just thought, no, I'll just keep writing. It'll be a little article or something. And it ended up being an article in America's Civil War magazine, and that really got me going into, no, this needs to be more of a book. And then the very first one of these kind of interviews I did got picked up by C-SPAN, and people started calling me from all over the country. The first woman that called me and said, I think my great-great-grandfather was on that boat, but I've never been able to prove it. Here's his name. Can you find him? And I did find him, and that led me to a number of other passengers on the boat as well. So it, in a lot of ways, is like being a detective. You know, the more information you get, the more you want, until you finally get the whole story. And I still don't have the whole story, so they may yet get me to write another book. But it was a fascinating, just lost piece of history. And the more I read about it in the newspapers, the more I realized even the newspapers didn't exactly get it right. There were a lot of errors in the initial reports, and the government too. Everybody said a different number of people died, and it happened on a different time, and there were just so many discrepancies. So it just became a puzzle and kind of a quest that I was on to get this information out there. But it happened so locally, and that's what I do. I do local history in our museums. So it seemed like the obvious thing to do as soon as I found out about it.
That's amazing. So it looks like we've got 9 minutes left. So we'll go through another round of questions, but it's going to have to kind of be a lightning round. So let's start again with D. My question is, Haunted by a Broken Oath has been described as having gut-gripping suspense. How do you so effectively keep readers on the edge of their seats?
I know the quote you're referring to, and that quote was from an author that I deeply respect, and I was so thrilled and honored when she said that. I try to get into the skin of a character as deeply as I can. When I'm writing a scene, I'm not thinking about suspense in a technical way. I'm thinking about what the character knows, what they don't know, what they're afraid of losing at that moment. And sometimes what the character doesn't know builds more suspense. You know, they don't know what's behind that closed door. The reader might know what's behind that closed door, but the character doesn't. And that builds a lot of suspense. I like to get into what they're feeling viscerally, in their body. And I usually write my rough draft in the first person. That puts me deep into the character, and I can feel their tension and their doubt, their urgency. And if I feel it as the writer, the reader usually feels it too. I feel suspense comes from emotional stakes as much as from plot. When the reader cares about what happens to someone, not just what happens next, that's when the story really tightens its grip. And this kind of ties back to the first question about blending genres. Genres only compete when they feel like separate jobs and you're trying to juggle. But when characters are real, the story is no longer about genre. It becomes about people under pressure. And when a character feels real, everything they've experienced belongs to the same emotional moment. And when the character feels real, their emotions accumulate instead of resting. So in my writing, J.D. Wolfe doesn't stop being haunted because she's solving a case. She doesn't stop being wary of strangers or people around her because there's an attraction to someone. She doesn't stop carrying her pace because the plot moves forward. Everything belongs to the same emotional continuum. That's why she feels real. In a broad sense, mystery exists because they need answers. The thriller exists because answers are dangerous. The romance exists because connection is how the characters survive the danger. And for me, the paranormal exists because some wounds and truths don't stay buried. And none of these are add-ons. They're different expressions of the same human need. And readers feel this even if they can't name it. Readers don't say, yes, excellent genre balance. They say, I couldn't put it down. They say things like, it stayed with me. They say gut-gripping suspense. And so I think that's where it came from. But if I can add on really quickly, I just want to say, Brian, I love that you write ghosts, because I write ghosts too. And I love to have another person who thinks that something goes bump in the night. So that's it.
Well, thank you. So my next question is for Stephanie. And the question is, let's see here. So your question, hold on a second, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm sorry, I've got it. Okay, so in your most recent release, The Kitchen We Keep, your story takes place in 1950s and 60s Chicago. Did you find this challenging given the drastic attitude shifts on dating and relationships between then and now?
Yes and no. I feel like love is kind of universal throughout time. A big part of the story is Rose's um, challenge and internal struggle over whether or not she's going to settle down and get married like her mother wants her to. And I feel like back in the 50s, that was a little bit more expected, especially coming from a traditional big Italian Catholic family. So yeah, there's that element, but I feel like that could still be relevant today, and especially in different cultures and different families. So I don't know if it's necessarily, due to the time period, but no, I didn't find it challenging. I found it interesting and fun to kind of explore that dynamic, that family dynamic, that expectation that a lot of women go through even today, expectations on who you marry, when you marry, and wanting to, yourself wanting to have control over who you love. So, no, I think it was just a part of the story that I really enjoyed reading. And like I said, I think love is universal, and there's universal challenges that people and women particularly face. So,
Thank you. So my next question is for Brian. And let's see. The question is, horror is not a genre for the timid. What sparked your interest in the supernatural? I think you definitely kind of touched on this as talking about your childhood, but if you could elaborate.
Yeah, I think growing up, being born and raised in Salem and spending the first 3 decades of my life, like I said, I didn't leave until I was 30. You just can't escape it, even if you don't like it or believe in it. When you are in Salem every day for 30 days through your formative years, from it's just part of you, and I think it's interwoven into every brick in that city. But if we want to talk about, I can really quickly tell you what made me want to be a horror. So I don't consider myself a horror author, right? Because that's why I say speculative fiction, because I do have a time travel novel, and I have a lot of things that aren't even near horror. But what made me want to be like an author that dabbles in all different genres was 7th grade. My stepmother bought me my first Stephen King book for Christmas, and I opened it. It was wrapped under the tree. I opened it, and I had seen some Stephen King movies in my life. I had never read one of his books, and that book changed everything. It just, whether you love him or hate him, I can tell you right now that reading my first King novel was where I said, this is what I want to do. I didn't know that you could do this and write like this, because up until then I had only read like I mean, people remember Christopher Pike novels. They were like young adult horror. It was like very fluffy horror. I didn't realize that there was such a thing as adult horror novels. And so I think reading my first King novel and growing up in the Salem area really molded and shaped what I write. And I do write a huge spectrum of fantasy and horror and sci-fi. And I think King has proven that he's done that through his career. And I very much admire that the man who gave us Shawshank Redemption, also, gave us, It, right? Those are the juxtaposition of those are wild. And so I've always kind of admired that in him. I've never tried to emulate him, but I've admired how he's able to do that. And then just bringing in the tone of Salem, the tone of Salem, I think, is always with me, even though I don't live there anymore.
Thank you so much, Brian. So my last question of the session today is for Karen. And my question is, out of the 87 men who perished in the disaster, the names of only 26 are known. Do you plan on continuing your research to identify these unknown soldiers?
I do, and I have. I actually know the names of 34 of them now. So I am still working and I am still researching, and it is my goal in life to find all 87 men. And it's one of those frustrating things because, you know, these were military transports. You know, the captain had a list in his pocket of who was on board. You know, the dockmaster had a list in his pocket of who got on board. And you know, the folks at the other end had a list of who was supposed to get off. But none of those lists I have found yet. So somewhere in somebody's attic, they have great grandpa's uniform jacket and it's got a list in its pocket, and that's what I need to find, is that list. But I'm going about it in other ways and doing what I can. But yes, I will identify them all, I hope.
Well, that's amazing. That's you're doing a great thing. All right, well, that's going to wrap up our Behind the Page for tonight. Thank you so much for to all our authors for coming, and thank you to our audience for watching, and have a wonderful evening.